Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the True Life Podcast. I'm so excited today. We have an incredible guest, and I know that for those people who enjoy intelligent conversation, you're going to enjoy the guest we have today. One, Henrietta Szutorisz. She is a biomedical scientist, an entrepreneur with more than 25 years of international experience in various fields such as virology, cancer, development biology, stem cell research, neuroscience, and behavioral studies. Her academic work has received numerous academic awards, both in Europe and the United States. She's a double threat there. Her work has been published in multiple high-impact journals. It seems to me that on any given weekend, she's presenting something somewhere in the United States or in Europe somewhere. It's exciting to see. In 2023, Henrietta founded Objective Recovery, which is a new startup that uses neurobiology and modern digital technology to address the lack of effective personalized solutions to substance use disorders. Henrietta, I'm so thankful you're here today. How are you feeling today?
Thank you so much, George. I'm very excited to be here. Thanks for having me, and it's an honor because I feel honored because I looked at some of the podcast and you have so many interesting guests. So it's good to. I feel honored to be part of it. So yeah. So
I feel the same way.
Thank you for the really nice introduction. So you actually introduced me really. What do I have to say?
Well, I think that the points that you bring up in conversation and the ideas that you talk about and the people you influence say quite a bit about you. And I want to, before we get started, you and I talked previously a little bit, and you had told me a little bit about a lucid dreaming boot camp that you came to in Hawaii. I thought that might be a good place just to start off to get things going.
Yeah, because I know that you are located in Hawaii, so I would love to visit. So I visited once in about 15 years ago, and the purpose of that trip was, so I attended a lucid dreaming boot camp, and it was, lucid dreaming is for those people who are not familiar. It's basically just the idea that we are aware, when we dream, we are aware that it's dreaming, it's not real, because most of the dreams feel like and seem like it's reality. And so these guys who organized this event, they studied, so part of it is scientists. So it's Stephen LaBerge, and they have a very long history of studying this and organizing events like this. So it was basically a course learning about the background, the scientific background of lucid dreaming, the neuroscience of it, and what could be the potential applications. And there are many different potential uses like creativity, any kind of creative thinking, creative problem solving, and also just adventure. Because what's better than having all these adventures without having to take a drug or going anywhere, just sleeping. So I did that. So it's I think it's very representative of my interest. It's a bit like unusual, and I'm interested in. I like to explore many things that are not necessarily conventional. So that was just part of it.
Yeah. Do you think that was something that began your inspiration into being an entrepreneur? Was this ability to manipulate dreams?
No, that actually started very much earlier in my life. So it started actually in my childhood because I grew up with an entrepreneur father, and who was very. So we had a very close relationship, and I actually even helped him in his business as a child. And he even involved me into and taught me how to think and how to develop a business thinking, because we made deals that he would pay me to help him during summer vacations when I was in school in his business and things like that. So it kind of organically developed my interest in that from that relationship and his, being in that environment. And then I actually started my very first business with him that was very, very different from everything that I have done since. So it was more like focusing on plants, exotic plants, and selling them, and creating a unique distribution of different types of exotic plants. And it lasted for many years. Actually, it was very useful to support myself while I was completing my studies. So to have some extra income. And then the rest of my businesses were, I kind of lived a double life. I like to describe it that way because I have this long academic background. I always wanted to be a scientist already when I was like 10 years old. And so that chemo just very early, and I never changed my mind about that. But I had many interests and also this business interest. So I always had this double life, meaning that I was doing research in academia, basic research, some clinical research as well, and always had different businesses. And the rest of my businesses were in biotech, and one in behavioral research technology, and the most recent one, objective recovery, is focusing on helping people find the best personalized solutions to addictions, substance use disorders. So that's more or less short version.
Well, there's a lot in there. It seems, first off, I think it's an incredibly beautiful story to hear about you building a foundation of business with your father. I think that in some ways families are like a business, and there's all kinds of talks about family businesses, and you can learn so much in that way, especially about like an ethical way to run your life and see your life like that. Was your grandparents also in like that similar entrepreneurial mode?
So actually, I never met my grandparents because I was kind of a late child, so they were already gone when I was born, and so. But I know that from the stories that at least one of my grandfathers he also had his own business, his own life. So that's kind of the influences, and I had many others around me also with that background as a child already.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said about the environments we grow with, and the same for plants, or the same for the environment we find ourselves in, which, maybe we could think about mental health in the 21st century and the environment we're in. You had posed a really good question to me that was something along the lines of, is it really getting worse, this idea of mental health? Or do we just have increased awareness, less stigma, and the more people realize it and speak out about it? Like, what do you think about that? That's a great question. And I was thinking about it, but I wanted to kind of throw it back to you and get your opinion about it.
Yeah, so I can share a bit of personal history with that,
Please.
because I think it's very relevant. So when I was growing up so I'm originally from Hungary in Europe, and when I was growing up, that was like a really long time ago, there was absolutely no awareness about mental health. So nobody spoke about it, and not even treatments were available. There was nothing like psychotherapy so popular in the United States, for example, but it was already even 10 years ago, not in my home country. So I grew up in a way that nobody recognized these things, but at the same time, I developed quite early in my life some challenges in that area, and that's also where my interest comes from. A big portion of my interest, and it was very hard to navigate that because nobody really understood, and there was a lot of misunderstanding. So, for example, I had an eating disorder when I was a child, and then other like anxiety, depression, things like, and later on I experienced an addiction, but at the time I was already aware from my own studies, and so it was very difficult to actually resolve that problem, and to even to think about it. That I didn't know what I was experiencing, and even when I visited, for example, I had experiences running to the doctor with panic attacks when I was very young, and at the time I had no clue about anxiety, that was a thing. And so I thought that I had a problem with my heart. And, I was 19 running to my primary care doctor. And even him never mentioned that this may be anxiety, just prescribed me a medication, like a beta blocker medication that is now being used for anxiety as well. It's very common, but at the time, no. And it happened more than once. And so that's how I learned that actually, so I have this I have this kind of predispositions. It also runs in actually mental health issues run in both lineages of my family different types. And so I learned very gradually and through my own experience that mental health, the thing, that this is what I'm experiencing. And so, and this drove me into this field. And that's how I developed an interest in actually studying this, because I wanted to understand. If nobody else understands or tells me anything about it, I will.
Yeah, that's really well said. Do you think that what was more troubling for you when you were going through this? Was it the fact that you didn't know what was happening to you? Or was it more of like, I want to understand this thing? Or like, what was it that was really causing the anxiety? Was it like a thought loop? Or does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, it does. So I think from what I figured out over the years, I think I personally, it's not for everyone, but personally, I think I just have a physiological predisposition because other members of my family also had anxieties, and it's very well known that that's a thing. So some people develop it from early life traumas and things like that. But I think I definitely have that kind of physiological predisposition. So that's how, and so that's actually a very weird thing, because if you don't know that's what's happening, then it always feels like anxiety is a very weird experience, because it always feels like something is really, you don't know what is wrong, and sometimes people project it into the environment, onto other people, that the cause is something out there, something I'm doing something wrong, but it's very, very often it's just so we don't understand. And so definitely my interest, the origin of my interest, was first of all trying to understand what was going on with me. I think it's very common in people who ended up in the mental health field. We want to cure ourselves, and but also in a larger scale. So I had also, in my relationships, I also met other people who had different issues, and it was so puzzling and affected the relationship and many things. And so I just developed a very strong interest in this way.
Yeah, I think that that's something similar that happens to most people. And it brings me back to the main question, which, is mental health in the 21st century, is it getting worse, or do we just have increased awareness? I think it might be both and. I think it is getting worse, and we do have more awareness of it. But I think that as we're going through this 21st century, it's a lot like your life. If we look at it from a fractal angle, society, the world we live in, is becoming aware, just like you became aware when you were a teenager. And because it's happening on this mass scale, there's more awareness, and it's just compounding in the effect right there. What do you think about it being a both and?
Yeah, I definitely think it's both. And the awareness is even, it has become almost like a fashion trend these days. It's like, just we all want to be, just improve elevate our self-awareness and awareness of the world. Or the talk about, psychedelics and these experiences. So it's a lot of interest. But at the same time, I think it's the lifestyle that compared to the lifestyle that we live now, and, humanity, or especially the modern parts of the world, that it has changed a lot since I was born, and I was a child. So it's the lifestyle that we live now. It's very, very fast paced, and it's very very high expectations, and also the access to information, and having the internet, and it's going now all these new technologies, and it has made lifestyles very kind of crazy a bit.
Yeah.
And it's very, and I don't think that human beings have had enough times to biologically adapt to these changes. And I think this is the other main reason, that the main drive that has created this increased prevalence of mental health issues in the last 10 years or so. And especially now we had the pandemic, and now the pandemic is resolved, but still the mental health in general, it's not, or the statistics show that it's not getting better at all. So I think it's the lifestyle and the awareness.
Yeah. Do you think that maybe what we're seeing is, it seems to me, from what I've read, the different case studies, and someone who studies this will know better than me, it seems to me that a lot of people, right before they have a breakdown, they have like the last straw, or their last moment. And maybe I'm both thankful but a little worried, because it feels to me like we're at that last straw, whether it's COVID, whether it's Ukraine. It's always this giant thing that is about to cause the world to fail, and it just seems we're running on fear. And I'm wondering what you think the relationship to fear and mental health is.
Yeah, it's definitely, that has also, it's because of this lifestyle, and especially in the past 3 years, the pandemic, and the economic changes, and all these uncertainties, that it's much higher level, created this higher level of fear. And So it's definitely it's kind of a doomsday thinking that many people
Yeah.
develop and keep developing, and especially probably you also see this, that the younger generations, like 20 something and teenagers, it's quite clear that they have a lot of mental health issues, and it's part of it is because they are aware of it, but it's also I think it's the consequences of this fast-paced crazy lifestyle. And
Yeah.
and it's also, so in terms of your comment about reaching that, so in the addiction field we often we have this term reaching rock bottom. And
Yes. Well
so
put.
that's something that there are a lot of debates among people who have experienced addictions or addiction professionals. If it's, some people suggest that that's usually what catalyzes change, real change, and the motivation for change in many people with addiction. So we can apply it equally well to any other, I think most other mental health issues, and even like an existential crisis, a normal existential crisis. But in my opinion, actually that varies because it depends on a lot of factors. It's not everyone has to reach the rock bottom, so the worst state, because what is the worst in my opinion for a human is what? Death, maybe. So you can always get worse, and so that's what also many people don't recognize, because we have this tendency that's a biological survival mechanism also, that we always try to focus on the positive and minimize the negative, is just to survive. And this thinking, this mindset is also applied automatically to these problems when there is a problem like that. So people always think that those bad things will happen to others, not to me, and some of them are actually quite predictable. So, and some people recognize much earlier, they don't need to go near that rock bottom, near death experience. So it's very different. It's very varied also. It's just in my field, in the addiction, field, that people who experience addiction and what catalyzes them to resolve their own. So
I love talking to you, Henrietta. Like, sometimes I think that one of the reasons I love talking to you is because the way in which you describe things is like an intricate clock. You tell me about all the different moving parts and how the gears are moving the other parts. Like, I love that. And I really think that the people listening to this can get a better understanding of that. And that leads me to this question about addiction and recovery, of which you have spent almost a lifetime studying. And this is a sort of a complex question, but I'll try to simplify it the best I can. And it's something along the lines of, sometimes I feel that addiction is contagious. And the reason I think that is because there's a lot of great things that come from this crazy thing called addiction, or hitting rock bottom. People that find themselves in that fringe, in that rock bottom, addicted to something, frantically searching it, they usually, when they come out the other side, if they make it through, they usually come out with an entirely different mindset, or the ability to see things in a different way they never have before. And that can be addicting. That can be this thing that changes them. It can be this thing that people turn to them for. So have you noticed that weird sort of dichotomy between addiction and contagion and people wanting to go there to change?
Yeah, so it's, maybe I have an opinion about what you call contagious. I think it can be that way, literally, like people learn the behavior from others. Like, if it's not contagious like a virus would be, or a pathogen, but definitely it's a huge area and literature in this field. But I more think that it's because we are biologically wired to develop actually addictions, because it's the mechanisms that create the addictive mindset and those behaviors. It's set in us, so that's we are born with it, and so those mechanisms actually serve basic survival. So examples that I like to cite, for example, so it's basically seeking rewarding, positive, pleasurable experiences, and that's what an addict will do also in with drugs or any behavior, gambling, sex, whatever. But there are very basic, and everyone knows that basic mechanisms that normal people do that serve our survival and the necessary, essential for survival, like feeding, eating. And usually eating is pleasurable for most people. If it's not, then there is usually a problem. And procreation, and then sex. And so these are two things that are also, they can become an addiction. And so we are biologically wired to seek these experiences and to experience pleasure and, euphoria, whatever we want to call it, from these normal experiences. And what happens in addiction is that it gets, very often we use the word that that whole system is hijacked by experiences that are more, they provide a stronger reward, a subjective reward, like a drug. They are usually much stronger than a food or a relationship or anything like that. So it's basically, and what happens is that some people are more again biologically wired, predisposed to seek out these experiences. And so that's also, there is a huge body of literature that genetic predispositions and other types that can actually trigger people into these negative self-destructive behaviors that turns into an addiction.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me. I'm curious, when you, was it this process that you went through and then all the things that you've studied that helped you open up objective recovery? That's the first part of the question. The second part of the question is, at Objective Recovery, at your new startup, how are you using neurobiology and modern digital technology together?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question.
Yeah.
So the first part, so that's the main inspiration for that was actually my own experience with addiction. And now it's in the far past, so I recovered from it. It was a very difficult experience, just like for anyone else. I was not exempt from, even I was a part of this experience when I had a drinking problem, and I'm very open about it. I speak about it on social media everywhere now, but I used to be very secretive, just like everyone else. And so, of course, that was very difficult, and it was very difficult to resolve. That was also the experience that partially inspired me to actually change, make a big shift in my career, my research career, because before I have not always been in neuroscience. I started out in other areas of biology, like you listed in the beginning of this conversation, and that inspired me for this change. Because again, as you alluded to, I wanted to understand myself and just how this works, and that was a long time ago. And then I resolved my own problem, and it was so bizarre even experiencing this with all the knowledge, because I was already in neuroscience during part of that experience and studying actually addiction. That was my specialty, and I always felt like almost like again double life, and because I was hiding it, to my knowledge nobody really knew about it unless I shared it. So this dissonance, this cognitive dissonance that it created, in my mind, that was one of the most difficult parts of the addiction for me. And so even when I decided finally that I want to change my life, I want to quit and recover from it, it was a very long process. So it was not any easier for me, even with this background. Maybe a little bit easier, but it mostly became easier once I found the practical resources that were a good match for me, that helped me in my recovery. So I couldn't just cure myself and just with a mindset change. That it doesn't work that way for most people. So I needed other help, and so I was also just like many other people. At first, I tried things that were not a good match for me, and I got stuck in those. Sometimes even people develop just this concept of trading addictions, that when someone had one type of addiction and they quit that one, and then they have this predisposition, they are still seeking something, they don't resolve that issue, that they don't feel that kind of whole, or whatever we want to describe it, and then so they get into other experiences, and it can go forever. And for example, I got almost like addicted to a community of addiction recovery community online, and that was so bizarre. And I was not even, it was many years ago now, but even with me, I consider myself very introspective. I have always been, but being in active addiction and going through that, why it's happening, it's very hard to see clearly. And I was really stuck in trying to just over and over, even trying this method, and people were just trying to, the community members trying to force me that this is what you have to do. And luckily I got out of that and I found what really worked for me. And so I just went through this whole experience myself. And then about 2 years ago, I made a big change also again in my career, and I quit a long academic history. I had over 20 years, so I always had an academic position in different areas, and I decided that I wanted to become 100% self-employed and pursue consulting first in these mental health areas, and then this idea of objective recovery and focusing on the recovery side had been incubating in my mind for a long time. And so I decided to finally pursue it. First, just doing some market research last year, and it showed a lot of interest. And then basically we started this just a few months ago this year. So it's brand new. And so again, it's the problem that we are addressing here is also what I experienced, and I saw many people experience. It's not really developing new treatments, but the problem of choice in the first place. What would be an appropriate, the best, personally most suitable treatment or treatment combination for a person based on their own background and that what drives their problems and their how they make decisions, their thinking style, and everything, personality, and then and also their goals, because that's also part of the big issue in the addiction treatment industry, is that very often the provider tries to enforce a goal onto the person who tries to recover. That, for example, many providers still only believe in complete abstinence, and that's very hard. That can be extremely hard to achieve for many people. So we target this problem of choice, and since we have this, the era of technological development and the AI and all these tools are available now, so we are using actually an AI-powered, machine learning-powered method to assess people and create an experience for them. So it's a gamification. So it's not just a questionnaire, and that's how people usually, when they see a psychiatrist or psychologist, they are asked questions, but that cannot reveal really unconscious motives, for example, that are very important for addiction. So we want to tap into that, and so we are creating this gamified experience and assessment, and collect data during that experience, and then use that data to match people with treatment. So
that is amazing. I love it. I love the idea of using, well, maybe like you said, it's not like a brand new, you're not revamping everything, but you are taking this idea of, okay, everyone's got to just stop cold turkey. Like, that's not going to work. It hasn't worked in the past. And if it does work, people that stop cold turkey usually relapse. I think I read somewhere between 7 and 8 times before they make it. So they're never really stopping cold turkey. They're just stopping in chunks. And that can be just as detrimental to people's health too, because when you're told to just stop doing something, that doesn't manifest in just the act of the thing you're addicted to. It usually stops in, okay, I'm not going to talk to my friends. I'm not going to go outside. I'm not going to do, that comes with a large chunk of other things. And I would like to talk a little bit more about this idea of gamification and managing the actual recovery, because it's, in a lot of times in science, we hear things like, how can you manage what you don't measure? So I guess when you have a game, you're able to measure your progress and seeing how you're performing at that level. And when you put it in the language of gamification, you're kind of taking out some of the seriousness, which is sometimes a roadblock for people. Maybe you could talk a little bit more about the way in which you're measuring these people's, the way you measure their recovery and how you manage it.
Yeah, so it's actually what we are doing with the gamification. It's not really a long-term monitoring of recovery. So it's the beginning before they make the choice that what treatment they want to pursue. So it's basically an assessment, a behavioral assessment, a form of
Okay.
assessment. And so what we measure is, so it's very open-minded and very open-ended. And people can create their own narrative, their life narrative. So basically share during this experience, via this experience, who they are, what lifestyle they have, and where they come from, what experiences they had earlier in their life, and also how this problem developed. And what they do is basically it's just almost like a conversation,
Right.
but with through this like fantasy-like environment in the game. And then they don't need to think, and that's exactly the point that is important, that they don't need to think about how they answer, answering questions or anything like that. So they just engage, just like we are engaging in a conversation, but it's much more spontaneous than that. And but we are measuring, so this is what we are still figuring out, because it's still, as I mentioned, it's very early stage. So it's product development, early stage testing, and figuring out what type of information is most useful. And so it's basically the narrative and also the decision making characteristics, and so basically different aspects of that personality. And so it's again the trick, if you can put it that way, is that they don't need to think. It's just like addiction itself is it's an impulse problem. It can also be, they can be as impulsive as they want, and they can also, and then so it's basically just a normal, a natural way of sharing who they are, and non-judgmental, also private, because they don't need to go to an office, or not even to a community. It will be just the platform and the person, or if they want, they can do it with a doctor or any treatment provider. And so it makes it very, they will, the expectation is that they will feel much more comfortable, and to share who they really are, and without, there are probably parts of themselves that they don't know, because they won't know what type of data we are collecting during the experience.
That's really well put. I think a big part of it may be not knowing who you are. And if we look back to the classics, it was Socrates who was like, know thyself. And it sounds to me, if we backtrack so that we can move forward in your discussion about your addiction, it seems that you came to a point where you thought different about yourself, and then there was change. And then we fast forward into what you're doing with objective recovery, and it sounds like you're providing people with an opportunity to see themselves differently.
Yeah.
I know that's kind of a lot right there, but does that sound accurate?
Yeah, it is. It is quite accurate. Actually, there is also a part that we will compare the data from this gamified experience with a traditional self-survey, so like a questionnaire.
Okay.
So the goal of that is that with the survey, it's just simple questions, just very similar to any psychiatric or psychological instrument, or behavioral testing instrument. And so that's more like a conscious way of answering questions and sharing who they are. And then so that will be one source of data, and the other source is this gamified experience. And one goal is also to compare them, the results from the two, the data from the two, and see if there is any discrepancy, because that can reveal that can be very helpful for people to see where they think their own thinking is probably doesn't match with what drives them really, and provide feedback, a very clear feedback. And so they can, it's just like how I learned myself that some things that I thought about myself not necessarily what would work for me, or what other people recommended to me were not the best choices for me.
It's on some level, I'm wondering, when you give people this behavioral test, is it like you give someone like a Briggs-Myers, or they figure out if they're EFNG or EFNJ, and then you could tailor something to them that would more than likely fit their pathway, if that kind of makes sense? Is that something similar?
Yeah, it is actually. So it's good that you mentioned the MBTI, because actually I'm drawing some concepts. I like very much that one, and also some others. And I'm a big fan of personality testing, personality areas. So I've done basically probably most of the tests that are out there so far in my life. I find it very helpful to the result. And so it's drawing concepts and ideas from many of these theories, different systems, but it's also the synthesis, putting them together in this, this like a 20-minute experience is brand new, how it's synthesized together. And it's also, some of it is just really hardcore neuroscience and behavioral psychology that is not really personality theories, but it's also involves that decision making characteristics, because it's very important about, again, the choice of treatment. For example, I can tell you an example from my own life, that when I was trying to use this community, I was always told that you need a community to recover from an addiction. That's the most important thing. And many people do find that the most helpful. For me, as I shared with you earlier, that was detrimental, because I just got hooked on that, because I was so isolated due to this addiction and many other personality tendencies in my life, and I used it the wrong way. And so it's basically I was just trying to straighten out those perceptions. And so it's actually in my own experience, I had some ideas at the very beginning what might help me, but I just rejected them very early, like medication and more like scientific based, not community based methods, because knowing who I am. But I just listened to this and just basically did the wrong thing, and I ended up doing what my intuition suggested to me, and that worked for me. So in my case, but it's not for everyone.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about, and that kind of brings me to this idea of relationships. Sometimes the relationships we have with things, you could describe addiction as a relationship, or you could describe your relationship to that group, your relationship to spirituality. So when I bring out this monster, this monolith called relationships, like, what do you think about?
Yeah, so this definitely plays a big role, and in many different ways, because if you want to discuss relationships, I would always take it back to you're just going, but not only just because many people when it's the word relationship is mentioned, they automatically think about interpersonal, human, interpersonal relationships. But the actual word, if you look up in the dictionary, it's not that. It's basically just a connection of things, concepts, objects, anything. It's a connection. And so the situation that connection creates, that's the relationship. And that can be one form of that relationship, possible relationship is the interpersonal relationship. And of course, in addiction, that's very important in many different ways. The very basic is just the relationship, the misguided relationship that people develop with the drug of choice, or the addictive behavior of choice. That's also, it's a kind of relationship, and the relationship with themselves. That's also very important, because many people they don't have that. So that's actually one of the biggest culprits in addiction that many people have. They never develop a good self-esteem, a good relationship with themselves, and it's chronically, they struggle in that area, and they are seeking a substitute, and they they experience a drug, and then that creates, many of the drugs create this experience that people feel that they are very powerful, everything is good and wonderful and all this, and it's just distorted. It's basically a reality distortion, and so they end up chasing that. And also human relationships, interpersonal relationships, that's also a huge area, even in the science, the research, that how that play a big role in the development of addictions for many people, especially early life relationships, because that's when we learn how to relate to not only to other people, again going back to the bigger question, the bigger concept of this. Basically, when after we are born, we learn, it's a very intense learning to relate to the external world, because it's many people even describe that birth itself, it's almost like a trauma, the first trauma that we experience, and learning to relate, and many things can go wrong, and it's very, very well known knowledge these days that, for example, traumatic experiences early in life, in the family, in early, interpersonal relationships, negative experiences, and not being recognized and not being supported can create actually contribute to this predisposition to seek these substitutes. So that's one way. And there is beautiful literature out there about this, so both from neuroscience. I can, if anybody's interested, just shoot me a message, and I'm very happy to share any, not too technical scientific articles about that. But there are also many excellent books on addiction. So in terms of the relationship, there is one that I really liked. It's from Caroline Knapp, and it's called Drinking a Love Story.
I love it.
So you can probably understand immediately that that the author experience also recovered from her own drinking problem, and so she discusses in that book how the addiction affected her life and relationships, but also the other way around, how the relationships problems could led to this problem later in life. There are others. There is another big figure in this field, early life traumas and relationships, and this kind of problems is Gabor Mate, Dr. Gabor Mate, and he focuses. He really believes that it's kind of, in my opinion, a bit more too universally, that it's always some kind of early life trauma and relationship trauma that leads to the development, contributes to the development of addiction. I don't view it as extreme. I in my opinion, it's a bit more varied. There can be different causes and combinations of causes.
Yeah, he's incredibly brilliant, but I think he's explaining his own life when he's talking about that. He's like, I had childhood trauma and I have relationship trauma. Therefore, and it makes sense. We all do it. I'm just using him as an example. But the things we have in our life, that's our relationship to life. And so we see those things in the other person. We relate to them, those things in our life. I think you are a great teacher. And I think that you would be I think that's kind of what you're doing with objective recovery. And if we just stay there for a minute about relationships and teaching, wouldn't the world be a better place if kids in elementary school began to go through courses in relationship? Like, that should be a part of every subject: math, English, science. It should have a background in relationship. And I think people would really have a more holistic approach and a more realistic approach about their lives and what is possible, and, good and bad, and just all these crazy words and meanings, but the idea of relationship is so important. What do you think about beginning to teach people about relationships earlier in life? You think that would make the world better?
Yeah, I completely agree. That would be wonderful. That's a bit similar in my mind to what we discussed about the whole mental health awareness.
Yes.
That how, I know that we discussed a bit online before this conversation. There's the role of relationship building in business and how that changed in the past few years. And so that's in my opinion, part of it is that also people have become more aware in recent years of the importance of relationships, and it also how that can what can happen when those go wrong, and this is also in my view, it's what's behind that, why it's so important. It's not just it's not just interpersonal relationship. It's again, we are wired for it. It's not only because we are a social species, but also the way the brain works. So everything works. The thinking and memory, everything works through association. So it's never just one thing that we experience and that we remember. So the memory, for example, it's probably you have experienced this as very, very often. We recall experiences when there is a trigger, for example, when you hear a piece of music or whatever that reminds you of something, and there comes with it a lot of big chunk of memories. And so I think that's our brains are wired for relational thinking and emotional, style that involves basically it's also these connections, the interconnectedness of everything, reality, whatever you want to describe it. But it's actually an objective thing, in my opinion. It's not who humans created that, and what happened is that we have become more aware of the importance of that. And to your question, the original question is that I think it would be wonderful to start teaching kids early in life, but it will be very important then to have the right teachers, because if some of those will be the people who abuse also kids,
Yes.
that wouldn't be good. They wouldn't teach the right lessons. And so that's, I think that should be part of education, and it's actually on the conceptual level as well, so to raise awareness and to prevent, because prevention, if you can prevent, raise awareness of people early in life, and that could potentially create, just people could avoid some problems through that.
Yeah. I'm curious, as someone who's an entrepreneur and studies relationships, it seems to me, at least in the world of entrepreneurs, it seems that it's very difficult to have a relationship to a successful business and have a successful family at the same time. And I'm wondering, do you think that the way we approach our relationship to our spouse or the people we love in our relationship is the same way that we approach our business? We often hear things like, hey, don't mix business with pleasure. And it seems that some of the people that seem to be playing at the highest level of business, they seem to have had 3 or 4 or 5 relationships. And it seems like you have to choose one sometimes, it seems like. Is that true? Or how do you make sense of that?
Yeah, I mean, it can be, it's definitely a challenge, a practical challenge. And it's a challenge just simply because of the time management. Everything takes time. Every engagement, every action takes time. And so if there is a new business that requires a lot of, energy and effort, that takes away from the time and energy that one can input in the other personal relationships. So it's very often kind of competition, but ideal, of course, it should not be a competition. So many people resolve it, actually. It's many entrepreneurs and others, resolve this by creating businesses and collaborations with their friends and, the spouses. And so these things are combined. Then, of course, that poses a whole new area of challenge, because there comes the challenge how to manage, because it's hard to separate things. What is the business? What is the personal relationship? Where the boundaries are? And that can be a difficult experience, but it can also create much extra motivation if we have business partners, and basically not necessarily people from my personal life, like friends and relatives and things like that, but people we like, basically, as people. And I, even in my own life, it's very funny that we are talking about this, because I never thought about myself as a good teacher of relationships, because I'm actually a very loner type of person. So I don't even have a family and things like that. So for me, that's not even a problem. But it's very interesting, and it's very important. And so it's but I did have experiences like that when I had some of my best collaborations were with people who were actually very, very close friends. And like I mentioned, my father, for example. So it does work, that, but it can be very challenging. So
yeah, it's interesting to think about the relationship between success and addiction, because you could make the case that people who are succeeding on a monetary, if we define success as, gosh, I hate to do this, but if we were to define success as someone who is financially free, and I'm not saying that's the best definition of success, but I'm saying that we do tend to use this idea of financial freedom and success, that may be best achieved through utilizing addiction to work, utilizing addiction to something. Just, you can even say addiction to service, but there is this quality of addiction that is almost connected to success. That's kind of a strange thing to think about, right?
Yeah, it's actually, I'm so glad that you brought this up, because this is also, it's one of my favorite topics. I usually call it not addiction, because it has a different connotation, but I call it obsession. And It's a
I like
bit
it.
different because,
Right.
addiction is basically that something that is destructive, and obsession is not necessarily just a preoccupation with, something that we are interested in. And definitely that's all, it's all these discussions that I'm very active on LinkedIn, and I see there's all these discussions from the startup community that everyone, it's just even, investors suggest that we have to be obsessional because, there are so many barriers, so many negative experiences, rejections, and so on. So we have to have a very, very strong drive. And many people who become entrepreneurs, especially repeatedly, they have that naturally, because that's also just like addiction. It's not exactly the same as the predispositions to addiction, like the same genetic background and everything biologically, but it's also known, for example, disorders, mental health disorders like OCD. That can also have some of that also can have biological predisposition, and so that's also some people are born with that, or it's just basically part of personality, biologically determined, and those people have a higher chance that they will approach many different things in that way. So I'm a very good example for that myself, because it's again it's just looking through my life, and I just basically just reading that, not necessarily to the level of obsession, but I have a tendency that can create many problems also if I'm not careful, that just getting hooked and so engaged in everything that piques my interest, my curiosity. That's how it works for me. It's not really necessarily human relationships. It's more like even this conceptual things, even just whatever, just for myself. And it just occupies my mind, and it's so hard to get out of that. And so that definitely helps, just going back to your point about success, that definitely helps to succeed if someone is so obsessional about something, because we push through everything, the hardship, to chase a goal. But of course, if someone is predisposed to obsessions and has this kind of tendency, that can create all the other potential problems as well, just like negative sides of obsessions, addiction, that's was that form a drug, to a drug or behavior, or other behaviors. Relationship, just continuing that line of discussion, that many people get hooked so much on relationships as well, and become the obsess over another person or a relationship, that can also become a problem. So so it's like a double-edged sword, definitely.
Yeah, I agree 100%. For me, my dad was bipolar, and I'm pretty sure that on some level, whether it's biological or it's just learned behavior, like I find myself sometimes in this world of just delusion where like I can totally do that, and then I can breathe life into an idea that is ridiculous, and my wife will tell me like, that is ridiculous, George, that'll never ever happen. I'm like, watch, I'm gonna do this, but it's so intoxicating. And I think that's almost back to this world of addiction. When you can create something in your mind that is bigger than life itself, it's almost like you give it life, and that it takes part of you with it, and like you breathing this life into it. And it's scary because it can take you away from everything you love. And I think that's like addiction. Like you're breeding this belief and you're feeding it, and all of a sudden you've become the addiction. And I don't know, I'm not sure I'm making a whole lot of sense right there, but it's so fascinating, this idea of obsession, addiction, and the world we live in, especially with social media. Like you said, you can go on LinkedIn, and if I'm similar in that I'm a lone wolf in a lot of ways, and I like to be alone. I really enjoy having my thoughts and shining them up and manipulating them and setting them in certain ways, and then trying to share them with people. And when you get that dopamine hit of sharing your idea with other people, and they pick it up and like, this is amazing, it's like it kind of allows us to find our own people out there. But when you do that, you alienate yourself in a weird sort of way. How do we make sense of all this?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense to me, and I also find it very relatable because,
I
for
know.
example, you mentioned bipolar disorder. So I was never formally diagnosed with it, but I definitely think that I have tendencies, and probably, for example, especially during the period when I was drinking heavily, I think I could
Right.
have been diagnosed
Medication.
like very easily because it was so obvious. So it's definitely, I know what you mean by that is the experiences and the mindset, and definitely. It's very challenging the age of social media and the
Yeah.
technology that has become a huge issue on its own. That technology was originally meant to make life easier for us, right? Not more difficult. But of course, with it came all these also these types of issues that it's so intoxicating because of the in part it's because of the novelty. Novelty usually it's very rewarding also for people.
Right.
It's part of biological wiring, and it's especially the just these past few years and all the changes in technological revolutions and the AI and everything, and the social media, and also the way social media works, and that you can have a community, you don't need to go anywhere, so it's basically effortless kind of.
Yep.
And that's part of it, because normally, when we have a like a real-time 3D relationship, we have to it takes more effort, to put it that way. The social media doesn't. So it's very, very easy to get hooked, and all the it's actually designed in a way, and people who create these platforms, they are very smart. They actually use these concepts from the neuroscience and how addiction and
Right.
these mechanisms work to create those platforms and to pull people in. And so it's very, very, very hard to once you engage to not to not to remain hooked. And that's also one thing that I really like to discuss, because I experienced that was also one thing that I experienced very intensely. That's also coming from these obsessional tendencies, the social media. So I never really use like conventional social media much. It's only LinkedIn that I
Right.
use now. It's for the professional purpose that I like very much because it's very useful. But I used to do more like discussion forums. So I wasn't a member of, I don't know how many different discussion forums throughout my life. Probably if you see me now, you can imagine that, why I did that, because, the interestingness of all is just talking about different things, and with like-minded people, and many of them with anonymous forums. So it's basically risk-free. You don't even know their names and all that stuff. And so I find it very hard, and every a few years in my life, and actually it's coinciding with my substance use, that was my
Mhm.
pattern, that just doing the substance use, and also while I was intoxicated, I also engaged in this online online things, and so they were very intimately intertwined.
Yeah.
So I had to work on both of them. So I had to stop that completely. I completely stopped that. And so I like very much, for example, LinkedIn now, because finally that's something that is useful, professional. I
Right.
use it for professional development. I don't use it for finding friends, although that can also happen, but that's not the primary purpose. But it's very hard, and I think everyone is affected by that. Everyone who has access to internet these days.
Yeah. We often hear about the way in which the internet is making us more unhealthy, whether it's a dopamine addiction, or whether it is seeing the very best of people, even though that's not a real representation of them. But I've been having this idea, like maybe the internet is showing us who we really are. I want to give you a visual and then come back to that. I saw this image of so imagine a mirror, and then there's an apple in front of the mirror, and you were standing behind the apple, so you can see the full apple in the mirror. But on the back side of the apple, there's a giant bite taken out, and it said, "This is social media," because we're only putting our best face forward.
Right.
But on some level, when you do that, us as the human being, like we know that when I see my cousin Larry driving a brand new Navigator, like I know Larry's got problems at home. I don't care what kind of car. I know that. And I think that we as humans know that even though we see the best foot forward on social media, we know people have problems. And I think that maybe the biggest problem we're seeing is that we're seeing ourselves for the first time. Like I can see people in other countries, and I see them cover up things the same way I would. and I can find my tribe, I can find my people, and I can find the way they're lying to themselves, because that's the way I lie to myself. And I think that might be something that's drawing us to our own rock bottom moment, is this idea that we're getting to see each other naked for the first time, and people are freaking out about it. So it's not so much that we're lying to ourselves, it's that this is the first time we're seeing ourselves clearly. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I like that direction very much, and it's like another one of those trends that sometimes I call, like, in a cynical way, like fashion trends. That is, these days it's so, everyone talks about authenticity and how important it is, and that has become one of the primary values for society, modern Western world at least, just many parts of the world, and so it's everyone aims for that, but of course, what can we do on social media? At the same time, we I think almost nobody shows the whole picture and the image, and so it's very selective. And of course, there are also the critics of social media, like we all know that it's very selective, and it's fake. Many people call it fake directly, but I don't see it that way, because I completely agree with you that there are very many good aspects of it. It's not only that you can use it for professional development, or to develop a constructive, positive relationships, but also exactly like you said, that to create, not only to see yourself reflected, or to reflect yourself in what you put out on social media, but it's also it's part of like how we develop goals. So when we come up with an idea, and how we develop that a new project. Usually in the beginning it's just an idea, and then many people try to we speak about it very often, like this phrase that fake it till you make it. Kind of like that, and it can be useful in a positive way. That start talking about it. It's like many people now on LinkedIn and other platforms talk about they call it like building in public, building a business in public, and it's a process, and it's useful in many different ways. It's not only the trivial, like finding partners and clients and so on, investors, but also basically developing and fine-tuning that what is often called a personal brand, but experimenting with through trial and error, but a personal brand, well-fitting personal brand would be. So I'm going through this process right now, doing it on LinkedIn, and it's super interesting. And also to your point, and why this works is, I think this is also rooted in part in the neurobiology and how we are wired, because it's probably also experienced there's a different stages of life. We tend to find mates, other people who kind of reflect who we are at that stage. And very often when we pass through that stage, much years later, we look back and, oh my God, I was with this person. How was that possible? Because we leave that behind. And so this can also, this works also on social media, that we connect with those people that, we feel like-minded, we have something common, and then we can see who they are, what they present, because everyone presents the best parts of themselves on social media. And that can be very beneficial, because, of course, I don't want to integrate the worst into my business from others. I want to steal, the best, to use the best. And that can be very, very helpful. And it works, the neurobiology part is, because there is this, neuronal pathways and parts of the brain. Probably, maybe you have heard mirror neurons, and so, but it's not as simple as that. So it's more complex. It's basically, how when we have a conversation, it's like almost like we immediately unconsciously adopt to the other person, and we kind of pick up the cues and style of the other person in order to be able to have a conversation or an interaction. And it works in social media. So I use it actually. I have been using this for now many years, very, very consciously, because I discovered this quite a long time ago, that we can use this, seeing others who I am drawn to. And I have a tendency to be very strongly drawn to people that I feel they might be very similar to me.
Yeah.
It's again this kind of mirror neuron, it's what we seek, and also psychologically in many ways. And what can I learn from that experience? Not just simply that I made a new connection, I made a new friend or business partner, but what does it tell me about myself, who I connect with? And it's just looking through my life, just seeing also different other phases when I was not doing well mentally, and in different ways, and the people I connected with very much reflected that. And at the time I was not completely aware of why that was happening. So we can use it this way. So if someone is aware of these mechanisms, we can learn. It's a very, very good source of learning and knowledge, who we are drawn to online.
That's such a deep thought. Like, I can tell. First off, I love it. And thank you for sharing that, because I think it is a model people can use to make their life better. And if you just take a moment to think about, how could you possibly recognize something in someone else unless it existed in you, whether it's good or bad? And I've gone down those rabbit holes where I'm like, I don't even like this person, or I'd be mean to someone. And then I have this realization, like, why am I being mean to them? Oh, I think they're weak. And then I'm like, oh, I'm weak. Oh no, I'm the one that's weak, And you're like, dang it. Now I got to fix it. Now I got to go apologize to that person. Now I got to fix this. But it's so powerful, because it is, whether it's a mirror neuron or a mirror image or our relationship to ourself, it is those things in the other that define who we are. And it's such a weird thing to think about, but I'm so glad you shared that. I think it's a beautiful thing, and I hope people can add that to their life. But I wanted to talk another minute about, you are doing this building in public thing, and you are the first person, I know that people have talked about it, but you're the first person that I have encountered that's building your business in front of people. And I think it's part of this new way of building community, building business, building your brand, building relationship to it. And I'm wondering if you could maybe help someone who's never heard about that concept before. Maybe you could break it down for them.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Actually, I'm not the best example. I'm very far from the best example, because I do a very moderate version of this for various reasons. So I don't, just put out everything online, and don't post as frequently as many other people. So there are many. Actually, we are going to have in a couple of weeks a live discussion, a panel discussion, just about this concept, building in public. So I will post about it, and we will post about it on LinkedIn. You will be able to see.
Yeah.
So, and but it's definitely it's a very helpful experience. And also I have been active on LinkedIn only for a little bit over a year now. Before, I just had a profile. I never really posted anything. I never looked at it. I just put it there to people can find me. And in the beginning, I was very hesitant to get into it. I'm still hesitant for different reasons. For example, my product has some, it's a kind of healthcare related product which comes with very serious legal aspects and regulations and security implications that are super important. You can go, immediately crash if you don't handle those well. So we have to be very, very careful how we speak about it and how much we share online before it's established sufficiently to meet all those requirements. So I'm very conscious about this. I don't do as much as many others, but it's definitely very useful. It's also in terms of the, who we connect with online. And one aspect of this, and that has been a lot of my experience, is that when we feel that we find someone who seems like-minded, like, very similar in different ways. That's a perception, because very often online, of course, especially online, we don't know that person. We don't know anything about their lives, especially on LinkedIn. People don't post as much about their personal life, the day-to-day life. And so it's more a perception and intuition. We can put it that way. And very often it can be misleading. And I experienced this many times, that it can be actually a lot of that part of it, that initial intuition and impression can be projection.
Mm.
And because that's also something that we are wired to make projections. That's also part of how, that's whole system that we just very briefly alluded to in the brain, the mirror neurons and so on, the circuitry. That so it's basically we never really have access to, I don't want to get very philosophical now and get into a whole different area, but we never really have access directly to reality. What is reality? And that's why it's a huge. It has always been a big philosophical question, and now it's also a scientific question. And so it's also the same for in other people. When we meet other people, I think very often what happens is that when we meet someone new, we are just wired to seek similarities, and it's very emotional. So it's driven by emotional relating, and whether it's coming from an experience that other person shares, let's say online, and I experience, so it's like sympathy, or it's something else. It's more like thinking style. That's how I tend to relate, like this intellectual connection. That's my thing always. And thinking styles, and I have a very good kind of radars for that, to recognize that I really jump on that, because I love to have interactions with people who are similar in that way. But often I had many experiences when I initially thought, and I was so excited that I found a person like that, it will be my best friend, my new best friend, and it didn't turn out to be that. And it turned out that my perceptions were not correct, because it's like we can also, it's just this, what happens is projection, that there is a very vague image that we can detect, and then if you infuse it with intuitions, and sometimes it's intuition is not always right. And I had many experiences when I had this initial excitement, that I found a like-minded person and we will do something really great together. And then it was we had the biggest and the ugliest conflicts, and the biggest level of just basically not compatible. And I had a few of those as well, and I learned from those and how to recognize. That's also a challenge, to recognize there is a new connection. But I see in it what excites me, what drives me into it. Is it really what is out there, or is it my projection? And it's very interesting to think about.
It's fascinating to think about. I wonder if there's a study, or maybe we could just use our own lives. If I sat next to you, Henrietta, I'd be picking up different signs. Like I would be catching pheromones, or I would be able to have the felt presence of you next to me. And there's so much communication that happens there. And I like what you said about infusing intuition. So if you and I were together, and I'm picking up all these different body signals and facial contact and stuff like this, and we're seeing each other close with our eyes, and then I infuse my intuition in there. Do you think that that's a much better read than me trying to infuse my intuition into who you are now? Because even though we talk, we can build this great bond together, and we can infuse this intuition in there. Do you part of me thinks that I can have the same connection, even though I know that's not logical. Like I know that if I was next to you and if I could see you and we were having that exchange, it would be a deeper connection. But I still feel the way I can infuse my intuition into this conversation, that we have a deep connection. Am I lying to myself there? Or are we lying to ourselves when we do that?
I think it's just taking this what we are doing as an example. Right. In my opinion, we would have to to take it further and see if it's right. What is in it in a long term. So that's my experience with this, right. This type of connection. But I completely what you mentioned about the different types of experiences. Right. Social media and online is extremely limited, and many people say that it's even they don't even like to. They have a strong need to experience the person also in reality, in 3D reality, in person, before they make a decision to form anything closer with them, because they just don't like that limited perception that can be very misleading with the projections and so on. So having more data point, that's how I like to to call it, like as a scientist. Basically what you mentioned, that experiencing someone else in 3D perceive reality, like all the different channels of communication, even just the visual. Just imagine doing this without the visual. Just
Yeah.
get what you do on LinkedIn, just text. That's why people love videos these days. That's why it's always videos posts always receive much more engagement, because people like it. It's like we don't even need to think, it's unconscious that we prefer having that data, and it creates, so it fine-tunes those intuitions, those initial perceptions. The more data we have, of course, the more accurate it becomes, and it's just very much like even the the machines, the AI models that are modeled on the human brain and the neural networks and all that. So it's the same, and how those are trained. And in the beginning, but it's not trained correctly, a model like that, it will hallucinate, and it will do all kinds of, it will give you a wrong advice and everything. And very much, it's very similar. It's also, if we don't receive enough data from another person and from their reality, it's very limited. And the question is that how much is real and how much is just imagination.
Yeah, I bring up this point when COVID came, and I think a lot of people were affected by going to school online. I know my daughter was going to school online. And one of the points that I brought up to the counselors was this idea of atrophy, like an atrophying relationship, because we can have this great conversation and you can learn online. You can watch a YouTube video and learn probably anything out there now. But I'm wondering if on some level, not being in the felt presence of the other person is going to be something that we lose later. Like we're losing this relationship. We're losing the ability to interpret these signals. We're losing this deeper connection. And I don't know if that's true, but it seems like there's a possibility of it. I'm wondering what you think about that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's like, it's not only that we lose data potential,
Right.
data point that it's not possible to obtain, but definitely it's just having a relationship online is not the same as having a relationship in person. So, what's where it's going to lead to, that's a big question that we will have to see, because the world is definitely, after the COVID, how that changed the world, and then now it's everything is, more geared toward the online, and again, the technology is going to evolve, and we will have just more and more and more of these platforms and tools. We will have to see where it leads to. And one thing that I'd be very curious about is that, are we going to be able to adopt to this to a level? It's like, it's what we discussed about mental health and how the modern the world lifestyles in the last past 10 years, it's not, we didn't have enough. The speed is so high. We didn't have our biological working. We didn't have enough time to adapt to that, to meet some of the requirements, and it creates dissonances, and that's why we have many of the mental health issues in part. So it can happen also due to this tendency toward the online and technology, and so that's why there is all this, the excitement on one hand, all the excitement about the technology and the AI and those tools, but also a lot of people are really in the very, very intense fear, and it's that fear is driven by many different things, and in part it's because many people just are afraid of losing exactly what you said, that losing this. The way they know connection, human connection, and so they will have today at work, there will be AI tools, they will have to talk to an AI instead of another human at a large portion of their work hours, and so many people don't like that. I'm actually much more excited about that, because I got into this virtual world and living in the online world, like very, very long time ago, and that was actually a problem for me for a long time, and so I found a way out, not really out, but find a way to find it useful and to turn it also into a business. So I'm satisfied with it now. So I'm more excited about it than fearful. But of course, we will have to see. So of course, it's a concern. I really definitely believe that the way it develops, the speed with which it develops this technology now, biology won't be able to follow that, to reach the same level of speed and to emerge easily.
Yeah, sometimes I feel like we're co-evolving with this other organism at the same time. And I I I am so thankful that you talked about how enamored you are with it, and that you have a good relationship with it, that you can build a new version of yourself together with it instead of being afraid of it. Because I do see a lot of fear out there where people are like, AI is going to do this, it's going to do that.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it won't do that, but you can choose the meaning of it for yourself. You can choose to have a valuable relationship with it. I can choose to talk to Henrietta Szutorisz in Switzerland and have an amazing conversation with someone I couldn't have done 5 or 7 years ago. I can choose to find my people. I can choose to find a tribe of people, or I can choose to participate in a call to action that someone is fighting for in a foreign country that I believe in. And there is something unifying and beautiful about it. And I do think that it's almost like this rebirth. Like we're beginning to reimagine what we as individuals can be. And sometimes with withdrawing from society, it's almost like a tide, right? Like the tide goes out and then it comes back in. Like we're withdrawing from these isms, and maybe it's a new ism, but we're moving into this new version of ourselves, and it's exciting. I think it's beautiful. And some of the things that I see happening are amazing. Like just in this conversation alone, we've covered the ideas of addiction and recovery. We've talked about how you have started off with this problem with anxiety as a young woman, your relationship with your father, then moving into anxiety, and then starting your own business to help other people, like a younger Henrietta. And it's just so amazing how we can cover all of that. We can cover a lifetime of learning, and you and I can both stream it to hundreds, if not thousands of people across time, and it can help them. Like it's so beautiful in so many ways. I know it's kind of a rambling thought there, but it's really beautiful.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's we have the same kind of approach and
Yeah.
mindset, but it's not everyone. And so I'm a big advocate, and I speak about this publicly and online, also social media and everywhere. That trying to kind of, because not to this mindset. It's like you said, that we have a very we don't not we don't have I don't believe in it's just, again, I don't want to get very philosophical and to digress very much, but I don't personally believe that we have 100% free will, that we can always everything is just, nothing is it's not determined externally, but anyways, that's another topic.
Yeah.
But it's we have a very high level of freedom to choose what the mindset, and choosing what buzzword, choosing a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset, and all these different ways of thinking. But many people who are fearful about these technologies and there's the online world and the AI, it's their background is a bit different, and I don't think that we have the option to kind of dismiss them, because it's actually probably a larger portion of the world at the moment who are more fearful. For example, they are afraid of losing their jobs and things like that, which is very valid. And what we can do is people like, for example, my life is like myself is lead with example, the way I think about it, and I use it for business, and I use it to create something that will help people in a positive way. Of course, there will be we will have to face many challenges, but that's always part of life, and it will always be part of life, even if without it, we just completely, for some reason, we lost the internet and the computers and everything. Suddenly, we just went back to that era. Then we still have challenges and problems in life that we have to resolve. So this is the 21st century challenges, a big part of it.
Yeah, I love it. I love the idea that, and I see this kind of emerging through AI and conversations like this. And one thing I see emerging is this idea that if you can become the best version of yourself, then you can change the world. And it's so tricky to think about it like that, because a lot of us have this idea, like we want to leave something behind, like we want people to think of us as doing good. And I really see this thing happening where the more you love yourself, the more you believe in yourself, the better version of yourself you can become. It allows you to have more faith, and that draws people towards you. And all of a sudden, just you making small changes and becoming the best person you can has a radical effect on the people around you. And then it's almost like that. You throw that little pebble into the pond and then those waves ripple out. Like that's each one of us. We're each, back to the philosophical part of George here, but we're all that little pebble, it seems like.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely so. It's, but it's also, it's again, it's like, what is the best? We can ask what the best version of ourselves is, because that's also very subjective. So how do you measure? How do I measure? How do we assess that every stage of life, in every moment? And that can also be the confidence and thinking that there's good self-esteem and self-love. That's another buzzword that I'm not a big fan of, but many people use it all the time. And these things are meant to be positive, but it's just like many other things. It depends on the dosage, and because too much of these things can also be detrimental. It's just like those behaviors that we spoke about, the obsession and being very engaged, very involved. It's in the right dosage, it's a good thing, but if it's excessive, it's not. And then I think it will be it is very similar with all these other things as well, self-image even. It's just all these things that another trend these days. Many people, for example, it's another big interest in relation to mental health, talking about narcissism, for example, and what that is. And I'm very interested in that topic also it's from the psychological and the neuroscience point of view, and how those personal disorders work and things like that. But just the narcissism, and the popular the lay public usually associates with that image is someone who is grandiose. So that person usually is at least displays a very high, very high level of confidence and a very, 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 very positive self-image, to the point that doesn't seem realistic, and it's probably not realistic. And I think there is always a fine line, like a spectrum, that it depends where we are on that spectrum, whether or not it's using something constructively or maybe not.
Yeah, that's well said. They say, I once heard someone say that, in the Western world, if you wake up one morning and you run into town and you tell everyone, listen, I am God, like they'll lock you up. But in the Eastern cultures, if you run into town, you say, I'm God, they'll say, congratulations, you figured it out.
Yeah.
That's crazy, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. It's again, it's just like, what's the meaning of words, and that's also how subjective that can be, that what someone associates with the word God.
Yeah,
and, depending on your background and everything, it's definitely it's is it an ideal to become godlike, or is it something that we should not pursue because that's a bit too much? And that's also that you can apply that to all the technology, because that could be a whole other discussion, that all these concepts and ideas that the relationships between these the AI identity and all that, completely different personas, and that how, if there is where that comes from, because many people believe that, who have this spiritual interest, that they apply that also these days in the modern era, in the era of technology, that maybe that's how they see those God figures, that it's another very modern society and things like that. And so whether or not it's a good thing or not, it's hard to judge. I think in every given moment, we just have to make choices. That's our challenge, that we have to we aim to make the best choices in every moment, and then see what happens, and use the lessons and try to draw the best lessons, and not to be misguided.
Yeah. It's interesting, this idea of choices and guiding and living our life. I'm wondering, would you mind sharing, like, what system do you use, or what tools do you use, or how do you evaluate yourself becoming the best version of yourself?
Yeah, that's a good question. I ask that myself as well very often. I don't think I have the ultimate answer to that, but I can tell you how I judge it, or how I assess it. So that's, again, it's very strong, very closely related to self-awareness, and it changed. I think it's probably the same for everyone, that the more self-awareness you develop, the more you are interested in these questions. When I was much younger, in my teens, early 20s, I was always introspective, but I was not nearly as aware of actually how things really work. For various reasons. Part of it was just I was not as interested because it was not everywhere around me. And the way I judge it, it's when I was younger, I basically I just thought I just followed my curiosity. That was my biggest drive. And I just had this discussion, actually, just responding to someone's post this morning on LinkedIn, that it's just this suggestion that we should not listen to what other people say and follow other people's opinions. So actually that was a problem for me when I was younger, because when I was much younger, I was so basically not caring what anyone said. And, it's just not caring about expectations, just, it's just doing what I wanted. So that was my biggest drive. And very often it was a bit much more spontaneous than it is now, because, youth, it's part of youth, we are more impulsive and with less knowledge and everything. It was more instinctive and, just following instincts and curiosity. Those were my biggest drives. Now it's much more, I always assess whatever I do and how I see myself is that, just looking at the larger picture and looking at also what is my goal. And it's always, I like to assess these things in a specific context, because, if you just ask the question, if you ask me the question, what is the best version of me? It depends in what context, for what purpose and all these things. And so I think for me it's important to define goals, both short-term and long-term goals. Of course, there will always be uncertainty. Many things won't succeed and so on, but to have goals. And then one type of assessment that we can always do is to see, to assess how much closer we have gotten to that goal, that purpose, whatever we want to achieve. That's one way. In terms of, being a good person, or, like personal attributes, it's very strongly also related to personal values that people have. I think everyone, it's a lot of psychology. I could speak about that also for 2 hours or more. But, I find it very helpful. For example, I got into this through my addiction recovery. One of the programs that I really liked, they had this exercise that we had to come up, we had to think about what are our 5 primary values in life, like just general, because it can be very important, because it's values change throughout the lifespan, but there is a tendency that some of it tends to be stable. It's part of our identity and who we are, and it can be very helpful to identify those, and it's a very interesting exercise. I do this. I always redo this every now and then, and I see if I still think the same, and fine tune it, and that can be very helpful, because what are my values and the ideal state of being, and that's what gives me the high level of satisfaction. If I feel that I am aligned with my values in terms of my actions aligned with my values. That was also one of the biggest difficulties in addiction, in experiencing addiction, the cognitive dissonance. This, values is one thing, and then what I do is another thing, so they don't match. And then all the hiding and manipulation and everything to keep up with this discrepancy, to maintain it. And for me, it's that's one thing that I seek out very consciously. They think about these things, it's every day I do this assessment, basically, even I do not in a very articulate way. I don't talk to other people about this all the time, but just in my head, that whatever I do in every day, is it I like to, it's a very simple question. Whatever motivation I have or impulse I have, is it useful at this very moment? How is it useful for you, instead of just pleasurable or fun? Because it's so important, but that's not all of it. And so it's always in the context of like larger goals. And also part of it is also exploring the unknown for me. I've always been very driven by novelty. That's why I have this whole career and interest. And so I just simply like the process of trying out, almost like sometimes I describe it, trying out different identities. So, different professions, different interests, and how that works. And so that's just interesting at what I can do with these different ways of approaching life.
I love that. That's such a beautiful way to do it. And I think it provides people listening to this or watching this some tools. And I really am kind of fascinated about the idea of trying on different identities. And it's true. If you're willing to be honest with yourself, you can, and you can, if you're willing to be honest with yourself and you take time to contemplate what's going on in your life, you can pretend to be a different person and even become that other person for a little bit and see what it's like and play with the idea of, well, if I was this way, then people would think of me like that. And sometimes when you do that, you can get a really good reflection or a third person point of view about yourself. Like it's a whole nother perspective like that. I'm glad you brought that up. That is an effective tool to change your life. It's pretty profound, really.
It is very, I completely agree. It's very helpful to try this thing. And we can actually use relationships in this way, because if there is someone who is, I mentioned earlier that I like to connect with people who are similar to myself, but that's actually not always very often that's not the most useful type of relationship, because, we don't have, we just seek out the same things. We have the same weaknesses and everything, so we don't really complement. So, and we can use many different experiences in this way to fine tune this image, even just looking at what type of image and personal brand someone presents online, and learn from that and try it out. And it's experimenting. So I think it's always good to be experimental, because again, I love theory, as you can see, I'm not against that at all, but it's if we only stick with if we get stuck at that level and we don't apply experience, we can be very, very misguided and using only intuition. Intuition is also generally, basically intuition, very often people feel that it's like something esoteric, mysterious. But again, I approach it, it's from a kind of neuroscience, psychology perspective, and it's not much more than perceptions that we are not conscious about, unconscious level, and then we can become conscious about. And then, of course, based on this, because we accumulate experience over lifespan, intuition can become much more accurate with more experience. The more experience and data we accumulate, the more accurate it can become also.
Yeah, I love that. I would agree. I think that maybe in the last 100 years, or maybe since the Industrial Revolution, this idea of mysticism has kind of gotten a bad rap. If we look at people, like maybe one of the greatest philosophers ever was Alfred North Whitehead, and he spoke really highly of mysticism. He has this quote that I always keep with me that says, the last part of the quote says, mysticism, clarification, action. And when I think about mysticism, I think about intuition, and it's just this ability to read what's happening where you can't put it into words. Like, it's not that there's not a language there. It's not that there's something that you're making up. It's that there's something there you're interpreting, but you currently don't have the words to explain it. And it's not always right, but a lot of the times you're picking up on something for a reason. Like when you read about it all the time, whether people knew their spouse was cheating on them, or they knew that there was a problem with their kid. It's this culmination of signs that have been weighing on you, but you just for some reason haven't picked them up. I think intuition is something that maybe isn't something you should hang your hat on, but it's definitely something I would encourage people to embrace and try to learn how to be more effective at. What do you think?
Yeah, it's definitely, it's being given as an advice by psychologists and coaches and people like that it's for people who are not really naturally using intuition as much as I use it a lot. I've always been this way, but there are different. Some people are not as comfortable with using intuition, because intuition is like it's internal, like subjective. Just combine it with our own internal world and how we put things together. And many people are not very comfortable with that, because they prefer just using really just hardcore data. They don't trust anything if it's not
Right.
data. And so that can block the use of intuitions, because intuition it's kind of works in the other way. So we incorporate a lot of subjective perceptions and connections. We connect the dots in different ways, not necessarily. For example, I had to learn as a scientist. It was a challenge in the beginning of my career, because I was always I had a very this kind of intuitive thinking very strongly always. And when I started doing experimental science, my first mentor really gave me a really hard time to actually look at the data and use data. So he said that he used very, very kind of harsh and rude words to me,
Right.
that you have to learn that, because that's why you are here. You are here to do science, not just to speculate.
Right.
To use data. And then so many people are not just naturally like that, and just basically they don't care so much about this theoretical, these mental things, and they're not even so they more focus outwardly, and that focus on the external cues and whatever they can see and reach, and with the five senses, or many senses as we can speak about, and that's what they accept, and they don't accept this subjective connection making. But I think everyone is using that.
Yeah.
It's just some people just have a preference for more like hardcore data versus these subjective processes. It's a weird thing that
It is.
speaking from a scientist, that
I know.
I actually prefer the intuition over data, but I think you have to use a combination of both in order to be realistic.
Well, I think that this is something that's probably made you successful. And I think that it's this foundation that's going to make objective recovery an incredible success. And if we pan back out, science has carried us a long way. But I think what we're seeing, and mysticism and intuition are bad words in science. Hey, we want the data. But I think what people fail to remember is that someone has to interpret that data. And when you interpret something, what are you doing? Well, you are, when you translate, you interpret, and all of a sudden there's your intuition. Like, you can't get rid of it. It's in there. How do we interpret these numbers? Well, what does this brain scan mean? Well, this is just confirmation bias. So we on some level, I love science, and I'm so glad that there's hardcore dataists out there that have carried us where we are, and that they have that perspective, because we need both. But science without spirituality, I think, can only go so far. And by spirituality, I mean intuition or interpretation. Like, the two go together, like the double helix. Like, we need both of those bars to come up. We need that so that we can move forward. And I think you are a prime example of someone who is on the edge of what is possible through beating addiction and starting a company to help people move through it. And you have these unique insights. You're building a business out in the open. You're on the cutting edge of what people are doing. And in a lot of ways, you're leading the way. And I see this heartfelt expansion into intuition as a really positive thing. And I'm thankful that you're talking about it, because I know for a scientist, sometimes it is a bad word. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, thank you. So it's also speaking of fine-tuning intuition with data, actual hardcore data. That's also part of our goals. Just to mention very briefly with objective recovery, that I talked a bit about the assessment that we are building, but later on I also have a plan to integrate much more like organic biomarkers that can be taken, genetic information and other things, that the brain imaging and things like that can be used to fine-tune this. The assessment that we are building is very intuitive. It's basically, it's based on I'm the conceptual, drive behind it, and just putting it together. And so it's very intuitive. I actually don't even, that's why sometimes I get stuck in my own head, and I have to go back and redo a lot of things, because I just prefer to follow my own mind rather than, just look up the data sometimes. But in the end, that's part of the reason that I also want to integrate data. But just one point that you brought up this spiritual and mysticism. So that's actually also one thing that I'm very glad to see, that's the people, like, even ordinary people who would not be interested in like what's ordinary, but who would not be interested in this. It's these days. It's many people are much more open to those dimensions as well, and because it's I think in part it's also it's the progression what has led to that. Is this the awareness and this whole with one of the biggest basic questions of humans and human nature is that what's beyond just us as human beings. That's what leads to all the spiritual and religions and all these different areas, and people are more open to that. And even what I'm very glad to see that even science is much more open to that, to use many of those, to integrate many of those as tools. That's also we will definitely also integrate that also in objective recovery and offer those as treatment options, treatment recommendations to the people who seem to match, who seem to have an interest in those, because it's not there have been many scientific studies. It's just one area that many neuroscientists study now these days is meditation. The benefits of meditation. It used to be perceived as something esoteric, and people don't see it that way because the people these days don't associate it necessarily with Buddhism and things like that. It's more just an exercise that we can do for different purposes, and all the other the psychedelics and all these other interests. And so it's also it's the world is becoming definitely our horizons are definitely opening up. So that's why I'm so excited to live in this era, this last few years, because it's just so many possibilities, like endless, and it's compared to like 10 years ago, even definitely 20 years ago, it's very, very different. So
this brings us back to that. We started off part of our conversation talking about mental health in the 21st century, and I have a new perspective after talking to you even though it's been like almost a couple hours, but like it seems like it went so fast. But even in that short time, I've had a reflection, and if I use your life as the metaphor, like you started off with recovery, but now like the last half of our conversation has been about optimization. You've told me all these ways you've optimized your life. You've shared with us tools that you've used. You've talked about ways in which you've seen the world, and it really seems to me like you've optimized and you're continuing to do so. And so I think that is what mental health in the 21st century is going to be. We're going to be moving from recovery to optimization, and it's happening. And I can see it in you alone. Like I'm looking at the sign that says objective recovery, and you tell us the story, and then here you are, 20, 30 years later, optimizing. And that is the path that objective recovery is going to show to people. When people come in and they meet you, they're going to see your story. When they watch this, they're going to see your story, and they're going to see where you are. And I think it's a story of optimization. Maybe recovery is the beginning of optimization. What do you think?
Definitely, the way I see recovery, that's exactly how I see it. Because just getting into recovery after just having a big problem, that's a long process. So that's definitely, very definitely a process of optimization. And the other word that is being used for this is another buzzword is self-improvement, and that's also another like fashion trend these days. And it's to the point that some people even suggest that it's too much, that we are always preoccupied by the thoughts of self-improvement and improvement. So I am by nature also it's a big improvement junkie, to put it that way. And sometimes it's so I definitely feel I don't reject those ideas when they suggest that it can be a bit too much sometimes, because it can prevent I tend to struggle very often with being able to relax. And if you always think in that way that you want to optimize, you want to improve, and even just the thought processes, to optimize your thought processes, it's like always on and on and on. It's just spinning all the time, so you never relax. And so that can definitely be also a problem, because we need rest as well, and we also need sometimes, and that's why people develop these ideas that self-acceptance or acceptance, and radical acceptance, whatever terminology you like to focus on. And so that's also one of those things that it's definitely optimization and improvement is a good thing, but not probably not excessively. So it's the question of dosage. What is the right dosage? And what is the right way to? What is the optimal way to optimize something? It's like being very meta.
Yeah, totally. It is, definitely. Henrietta, I'm having an absolute blast with you, and I really, you and I have talked quite a bit on LinkedIn, and we have shared some thoughts about posts, and we've had some really great conversations. But I got to say, talking to you here has exceeded all of my expectations. I really enjoyed it, and I'm hopeful that we can do it more often, because I think that the tools you're providing for people are, I mean, I'm a little selfish because the tools are helping me, so I'm hopeful that they help other people. So I thank you for doing that, and I'm curious if there's anything that is there anything that we haven't covered that you wanted to cover?
It's time to wrap up, because it's also, I think it's probably for the sake of the audience, not to lose them. But I think we can leave it at that. And again, I also would like to thank you very much for having me. And I tremendously enjoy this conversation and, just getting to know you a bit. And I definitely also agree that, we have, just many shared interests and probably, overlaps in how we approach things. So it's a lot of fun. And so speaking of improvement and optimization, I would be, if you want, I would be happy to come back another time.
Yeah,
we could
absolutely.
revisit maybe in a year or something like that.
Sooner than that.
That can be also helpful for me, as a kind of accountability that, having that as a perspective that, what am I going to present in a year? And, so hopefully it will be an improved version of the company and myself and everything.
Yeah, in my mind's eye, I have this idea of building a platform where people can have like an interesting debates, like some of the topics that we covered. I thought it would be fascinating if we could get like a panel of 4 people, and then we could have a topic that maybe maybe it's Chat GPT, or maybe it's this idea of optimization, and we could all have a different opinion about what it was. And then halfway through, we would be forced to argue from the other point of view. And I think that would be an interesting conversation for people to join in. And so anyways, I've got a lot of things I'm working on in my mind too, is what I guess I'm trying to say. And I would love to have you back way sooner than a year. I'm definitely going to hold your feet to the fire and keep you accountable, because I think that people can follow on this journey and they can learn. And before I let you go, though, where can people find you? What do you have coming up? And what are you excited about?
Yeah, so the best way at the moment to find me would be LinkedIn. So if you just take my name, it's very unique. So just put in, everyone can find me very easily. There is also a lot of information about my scientific research and publications, everything online. And many of those, unfortunately, are not accessible publicly because the journals put it behind a paywall. But please, if anyone is interested, reach out to me. I can always send a copy for free of those publications. And most importantly, we will have a website up soon for objective recovery. It will be objectiverecovery.com. So objective recovery, one word, and .com. And so people will be able to find more information specifically about this. There will also be educational aspects. And also just to mention that we plan to have actually, you just mentioned that it would be interesting to have a panel discussion.
Yeah.
So this is one thing that I think it would be very, very interesting probably for your podcast. So do some of those, because they can be really fun and have different perspectives. But we plan to do one of those quite soon, in about two weeks of time, with some other people on LinkedIn. And the topic will be building a business in public and how we different. So we are a small group of people building different businesses with quite different backgrounds, and we will share different stories and our perspectives and answer questions. So there will be posts about that on LinkedIn, and usually it's also when I don't really attend many conferences this year because I want to focus on this company and building the product. But when I do, I will also post about that, or they will be on the website.
Yeah, I can't wait to check it all out. It sounds fascinating to me. I would recommend everybody listening to this or watching this, go to the show notes, check out Henrietta, see what she's going on. She's an incredibly compassionate person who has helped a lot of people, and I think is about to help more people than she could possibly imagine with objective recovery. I'm really thankful that you were kind enough to share your experiences. I think that that's the way people learn, is through stories and understanding other people's traumas. And it's not always easy to talk about them. So thank you for doing that. I will be in touch. And ladies and gentlemen, hang on for 1 second, Henrietta. I'm going to hang up with everybody, but I want to talk to you for one more moment. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here and spending time with us. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as we did. And we will be back soon. Aloha, everybody.
Thank you so much.